Welcome to the Numerology and the Astrology for April 30th, 2020. If you add all those numbers together, you get an 11, and the 11 is the number of expansion and contraction. So whenever there is expansion happening, there is always that fear that comes up that as you expand, you're suddenly like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? And then you'll tend to contract down upon yourself. So you can feel the expansion that is trying to happen, and let's do the obvious. Some states are trying to open up, but this number can easily collapse into the number 2. If you add the 1 and the 1 together, you get a 2, and that would be negative mind and critical mind. So I'm crossing my fingers and toes that we do not have a second round of this, but I'm afraid that the chances are high rather than low. Now, I would love to be wrong, and I hope that I am wrong, because Americans, have access to different things, and maybe somehow we, can fare better than other countries, and maybe we can be healthier, and maybe we have more distance and fewer people, and, maybe we can make it work. But no matter what, protect yourself and your family, and be careful and think things through before you do them, and allow an internal expansion that is one small bit at a time. Don't overdo or push too much, because there's still such a long way to go. Now, the astrology today, the moon is still in Leo, which adds a bit of passion and drive into the mix. And it squares with Mercury and Taurus, and it gives your spiritual gifts greater depth and insight. So do your best to not be inconsistent and reactive, because shallowness does not become you. The moon squares Uranus, and that can make you feel eccentric, headstrong, irritable, and capricious. So watch out for the fanatics. You may feel exhausted and derailed by some of the craziness in the world, but just stay the course. Love can tend to feel quirky and intense. Things feel abnormal, and they are. So, we are in a half moon right now, and so because of that, there can be difficulties at work, and disagreements in public can easily escalate, so just be aware. The Mercury is in Taurus, conjuncting Uranus in Taurus, and this should make you determined, creative, and intuitive. Traditional views seem outmoded and outdated, so don't use them. You want some sort of mental breakthroughs and innovation today in your thinking. For some, that may make you a bit nervous. For others, that may make you very focused and driven. Let's go for focused and driven. Okay, so my quote for today: fear does not go away. You have to notice the fear. You cannot ignore the fear. You have to confront the fear. Most of humanity carries a lot of fear. The suppression of that fear is the root of most illnesses and disease. It is the baseline of this dimension of reality. We are here to navigate fear in a balanced way. We are here to learn to love the parts of ourselves that are afraid. Okay, so my story today is a story about myself and a boyfriend many years ago when I was in Hawaii. And I met the Apu, which is a spirit goddess, a protective goddess of the volcano, which is, of course, Pele. I was in my 20s, and I was dating a gentleman, and we decided to go to Maui on vacation. And I had been there before, and I love the islands. Who doesn't? So we decided to hike down into Haleakala crater at night to see the silverswords blooming in July in the crater. And these flowers kind of look like sea anemone, but on the ground rather than in the ocean. But when they bloom, they have this long stalk that goes up that's very tall. It's sometimes about 4 feet tall. And they have many blooms, and the smell is intoxicating. But they bloom at night as they are pollinated by, I assume, moths rather than bees. So off we went with a few others, none of which I knew at all, none of these people. One of them was a friend of my boyfriend that lived on the island. And as we were walking down, my boyfriend asked me to wait 10 minutes while he went ahead, because he wanted to hear the silence in the crater. I agreed and dutifully waited, and then continued down the trail. I quickly realized that this was probably a terrible idea, because he had all the gear. He had the backpack with the water, the flashlight, the food, the rain gear, And we were supposed to meet at the bottom of the trail where the horses could be tied up and take a break. And I got there, but there was no one. So I waited and waited and waited, and I never saw anyone. Not only none of the people that we had gone with showed up, and they were supposed to be behind me. Not my boyfriend. There was no one. And I contemplated climbing back up, but then I realized that I did not have the car keys either, and at the top is where it's very windy and cold because you're at 10,000 feet, and at least in the crater I was sort of out of the wind, and I knew approximately the direction we were going. So after waiting an hour, I headed in the direction of the cabin trail that I knew we were supposed to go to. And that trail would eventually pop us out at about 8,000 feet. But it was a long road, and that goes to a parking lot. It was along the road that goes to the parking lot at the top. So somebody had put a car down below at 8,000 feet, and then we had the rest of the cars up at 10,000 feet. Now, what I did not know was that at the center of the caldera, it is filled with iron, and that makes compasses spin. Well, I did not have a compass, but I felt spinny, and I felt like I was discombobulated and confused. And it's in the middle of the night, and it's terrifying, and you're in there, and you hear all these weird sounds, which I later found out were the nenes sleeping, which are these Hawaiian goose, but they make this really funny sound. And so by now it's about midnight, and while it is a full moon, and at first I could see, eventually the moon would set over the lip of the crater, and it was going to turn pitch dark, and I had no flashlight, no water, and no rain gear. I was starting to freak out. And when I came around a corner and thought in the moonlight, I saw a Chinese man bent slightly looking at me like this. And I got very excited, and I ran up to him thinking that he was a real person, only to have him shapeshift in the moonlight into a blooming silver sword. I was stunned. I could have sworn I saw a man standing there. On one level, I thought that I was going a bit crazy. And on another level, I wondered if these silver swords were the reincarnation of ancient enlightened masters that were just hanging out there. Because that's how this guy felt. He felt like, Confucius or something. So, still confused and becoming more afraid by the minute, I called out in my mind to Pele to help me, and I asked with all reverence and respect and honor for her help. And I explained that I was lost and I did not know where my friends were, and I needed to get out of the crater at the 8,000 foot level. And much to my surprise, she responded, clear as a bell in my head. She and I came to an agreement on payment to help her connect with her sister, Mount Shasta in Northern California. I thought that was really interesting because she is a black mountain and Shasta is a white granite mountain. And so it was this interesting dance of the yin and the yang between the two. And so she asked for me to go to Shasta in August and do offerings for her on that mountain for her sister Shasta. And I agreed. And just a side note, I did do just that. I think it's a very bad idea to not follow through with a volcano goddess. Okay. And it was right at that point that the moon went over the lip of the caldera and it became pitch dark and I could not see anything. Somehow the trail, because of the people stomping on it, was a lighter color than the surrounding rock. And so I continued to chat nervously with Pele as she guided me to the cabin that I was seeking. I assumed that it might be a place that I could get out of the wind, and if someone was in the cabin, I could wake them up and just get some water and some warmth. But by the time I got to the cabin and knock, I realized that there was no one there, and it was completely locked down, and there was nobody that was going to be there. And then I saw a sign that said, "Park Exit." And I went, that's where I'm going. And I took the trail up, and sure enough, just as the sun was rising in the distance and the wet fog was coming in and I was starting to get soaked, I managed to get to the parking area at the 8,000 foot area level. And there was one car parked with lovers making out inside, and the windows were all steamy. But I was freezing cold in the wind and the wet, and so I knocked on the windows, and those local Hawaiians were kind enough to let me into their warm car to get warm and to wait for my friends to come out. And they said that this was the logical exit for such an adventure, and they were kind enough to take me all the way to the top at the 10,000 foot level to see if my friends were there, but they were not, and I did not have the car key to get into the vehicle, so back down we went to the original parking area and waited. Eventually, my friends did come out, and what no one had told me was that they had all dropped acid to do a journey. Somehow I got left out of that loop, so it was more clear why I never saw them, because they were probably communing with the rocks as I walked by and never even saw or heard me. Of course, I wish someone would have told me that that's what they were planning all along, but at least I got to meet and chat with Pele and another potential Confucianism Apu on a great mountain. So somebody made a comment today that, that they said they really appreciate me sharing the stories because it's actually making everybody start to remember their own stories. And I'm doing this on purpose because right now there is so much fear in the world and there is so much upset that's happening. And I'm trying to compensate by sharing spiritual stories. So thank you for listening. Bye.